Hi, I'm Louise Paling. Reason my Twitter handle is Short Louise, and I'm not standing behind the lectern, or the same thing. Can I get a feel for how many people have come across Alistair Cockburn's Oath of NonAllegiance before? No one. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to read this bit. Alistair says, I'm tired of people from one school of thought dissing ideas from some other school of thought. I hunger for people who don't care where ideas came from, just what they mean and what they produce. So I came up with this Oath of NonAllegiance. And this is my one and only wordy slide, but I felt I needed to put the oath up there. I promise not to exclude from consideration any idea based on its source, but to consider ideas across schools and heritages in order to find the ones that best suit the current situation. Now, for years, I think I've been doing this pretty naturally, kind of pick things up. But it wasn't until I came across this oath, this promise, that I realized I was probably quite biased in a lot of cases. I mean, we're all at a DevOps conference. We all hate Waterfall with a vengeance, right? Nothing possible good could come out of that. Most of us are working on products or are in companies who have got to where they are through very successful Waterfall projects even. So it works. It does have some good things about it. We happen to think there are better ways, but we can't completely dismiss something. So I'm going to take you through some ideas, some methodologies, and pick out the bits that I've found are useful for me across a whole range of things. I'm going to start with some commonly accepted ideas. So I think there are things now that pretty much we all agree with. We'll see how many people disagree in a minute. So to start with, how many people have got some sort of team board, a Kanban board that they're using? Excellent. Generally speaking, that's considered to be a good idea now. Get your work visible. Everyone knows what everyone's working on. Concept comes from Kanban. Kanban obviously also has other things like WIP limits, which can either be per column or per row, which is the thing people often miss. I mean, Kanban does it in the how many tasks do you have in progress. It can actually work quite well with how many stories do you have in progress as well. We also take from Scrum the idea of 10-minute meeting every day to just coordinate with everybody, find out what it is your colleagues are working on. So who does stand-ups? Okay, so not that long ago there was a big war between Kanban and Scrum, which is correct, the one true way. Well, it's kind of gone now, we don't worry about that anymore. We're also at a DevOps conference, so I feel fairly confident in saying getting rid of those silos is pretty much a generally accepted idea. Now, some of us are struggling with getting rid of the dev and the ops silos, but there's not that many places left who still have separate requirements analysis teams and developer teams and separate test teams. These are things that have gone from being complete way out concepts to just being the norm. So what are some things that aren't necessarily generally accepted? Scaled Agile. People come across the various methodologies to go big scale Agile. So SAFe, LESS, DAD, Nexus. There's lots of them. I'm running out of things off the top of my head. This is where I should have come up with speaker notes. I first came across Scaled Agile with the Scaled Agile framework with SAFe. I hated it on site, which is a ridiculous idea. If you go to the website, there's this big picture. There's so much information in there. And then I ended up actually looking at it in detail. And it turns out there's some really good ideas in there. The one that I take away from this is the idea of, across multiple teams working on the same product, when you're trying to plan what you're doing, have a combined planning session of some sort. And the idea of having a dependency board that shows what the different teams are working on, roughly speaking, at roughly what times. It's still agile, things will change, but working out what the dependencies between the teams are. So that is our dependency board that shows exactly who's working on what at the moment. The post-it notes are common themes going across different teams. And we find it's working quite well for us. We also find it causes quite a few problems as well, because nothing's ever simple, is it? Continuous delivery. Let's go faster. Always faster. Continuous integration, continuous development, continuous deployment, continuous delivery. Continuous is faster than you think. The one thing that I pick from this, there's a whole load of things. Automation is key. You're going to have find it very difficult to be continuous without automation in place. But the part of it I like is pretty much this diagram originating from Jez Humble's continuous delivery book, which is the idea that as you're checking code, you have cascading levels of checks. So your initial tests are really fast. And if it passes those, it goes on to the next level, which might take a bit longer. And then if it passes those, it'll go on to the next level. And at any point, if it fails, everyone downs tools and fixes it. If your build goes red, you have to stop and fix it. Which means that actually the part of continuous delivery that I find important is more the culture change than the tooling change. But I find a simple diagram can help explain what it is that we're trying to do and why it's so important. This isn't massively different from the way things have been done before, but this idea that having that single chain through to production is really important, and we don't want to interrupt it. I'm doing for time. That really helps just focus the mind, and that idea I love and I cling on to. Okay, controversial one. Waterfall. What possible good ideas can come from Waterfall? Well, there are a few. The one for me that sticks out is risk management. Come on, show some appreciation for the risk picture. No? Okay, so how is it possibly a bad idea to keep a log of your risks and your issues and review them regularly? That's common sense, that's not Waterfall. And just because the idea has been embedded in this methodology we don't like anymore, doesn't mean that concept is bad. I'm going to move on quickly because I did promise my boss that if I was going to come here, I wasn't going to do anything stupid like claim there was anything good about Waterfall. So, next. The theory of constraints. Who's read the Phoenix Project? Excellent. It's based on a book called The Goal by Eli Goldratt. It's basically a rewrite of it set in an IT environment. If you haven't read The Goal, I suggest you do. If that feels like too much effort, they've just published it as a graphic novel. Yeah, my copy hasn't arrived yet. I'm very disappointed. So the big thing I take from the theory of constraints, the title is obvious and my picture, is identifying your bottleneck. So find the one thing that's slowing this continuous delivery chain down and make sure you focus on that. You can make any part of the rest of your system faster. If it's all got to go through the one bottleneck, you're not going to get any better results. So the best way we have of doing this, in my opinion, at the moment, is user story mapping or process mapping. Either way, whichever kind of system works for you. User story mapping is probably more for your end user view, so making sure whatever it is you're producing flows well. The process mapping is more internally, making sure that whatever you're doing to get your product out flows well. So maybe map out your process and include timings and how long does it take to do everything. Focus on those ones that are causing things to slow down. Seriously, if you've not read the Phoenix Project or The Goal, go read them. ITIL. Yeah, another controversial one. Now, every time I show people this picture, I get one comment. Anyone guess what it is? No. The big problem I get is everybody's very upset that most of the blocks are upside down. However, right now, that's stable. Don't go trying to fix the blocks being upside down. Be careful what you're doing with it. If you're going to go and make a change and you're going to mess it up, it's all going to fall and everything's going to be horribly wrong. Yes, okay, some of the logos are wrong. That is something that can be lived with. If you try and change the wrong kind of thing in your system, you're going to lose the game. So my big takeaway from ITIL is change management is actually important. Not the no, you can't do anything kind of change management. Appropriate change management, involving the right people thinking about the consequences of what they're doing. So stability is very important. If your production system goes down, it doesn't matter if you had a minor issue. Lean startup. Eric Ries's Lean Startup. Anyone familiar? Okay. So the idea here is to ask yourself the question, should we build this? Not can we build it? We can build anything. We're clever, right? We can do anything we want. Should we do it in the first place? And the way Eric is suggesting this is done is by running your, well, I was going to say your projects, but even your user stories and whatever you're working on as an experiment. And he has this build, measure, learn loop where you decide up front, what is your hypothesis? What are you trying to test? Build something that is just enough to test that. Measure whether you've achieved what you were intending to or not, and then decide whether you should continue along that route or not. And that's where you'll hear the phrase pivot or persevere. And it's also where the phrase MVP, minimum viable product, comes from. It's in this terminology, it's the smallest amount of work that lets you get round this loop as quickly as you possibly can. So there's no point building a new bit of functionality into your product if none of your users actually want it. What can you do that's quick and nasty, and then you can have some telemetry in there and find out if any of your users actually click on it and try and use it. You can then build it up from there. Extreme programming. We heard a bit about this yesterday. There are quite a lot of aspects from that. Probably won't be surprised to hear that my takeout from that is pair programming. I wish the people I saw programming were as happy as these guys. As a manager, it's really hard to get your head around and to think, yeah, two people sat on one computer doing one job. But the data shows time after time, two people, one computer gives better results and gives us more value out at the end than two people on separate computers working in isolation. We get rid of the need for code reviews because you're reviewing each other's code as you go along. We get people being able to pick up ideas from whoever they're working with, get the natural learning that comes along with just understanding how other people work. And if you want to take it to extremes, it is extreme programming after all, then there's always mob programming if you want to really go for it. Cynefin. The word's Welsh. Most people when they talk about Cynefin say there is no English translation. It's one of those words that doesn't really translate. Google Translate tells me it means habitat. So if you've not come across Cynefin before, it's this idea of understanding what type of work you're working on. So a really quick overview. You've got the simple ideas. These are the things that you'll give to your help desk. There's best practice. If this situation happens, do this. Figure out what you're doing, categorize it, just get on with it. Complicated things, there's no real best practice. There's a whole lot of good practice. This is the things that your experts can deal with. Complex gets a bit more difficult. You're not entirely sure what's going on. You need to really do some proper analysis to work out what on earth is happening in the first place. And chaotic is you have no idea what's going on. You're just going to start acting straight away, which sounds strange. But consider your production system's just gone down. At this point, you don't care why it's gone down. You just want to get it up. And then later on, you'll figure out what happened and what caused it. Now, generally speaking, in development, we want to be in the complicated, complex spaces. We want to be pushing work into simple, but as soon as it's in the simple space, you either automate it or you pass it on to somebody else to deal with. So it might go to your first line support to just, this is now the process, do this every time. And my big takeout from Cynefin is know where you are. Always know what state you're operating in, because if you're operating in the wrong state, you're going to take the wrong kind of actions. If you're in a complex space and you think you're in a simple space, you're just going to blindly go down and follow that checklist, and it's going to be the wrong checklist for where you are right now. Which brings me nicely onto the checklist manifesto. Atul Gawande came across the concept and has found checklists literally saving lives. Pilots, very clever people, every day before they take off, they have a checklist, they go through, they make sure they've done everything. Surgeons are now using it, and this is, again, literally saving lives, making sure everything's right and they know what they're doing. These aren't stupid people doing this, having to follow their checklist to have a clue what they're doing, but they're finding that it really helps them to make sure they're on track and they know what they're doing. So my takeout from the checklist manifesto, it's basically use checklists. There's two kinds of checklists. Either the ones where you already know what you're doing, you pilots, they do the same thing every day, they know what they're doing, but if you're not careful, you get a little bit too into it and you just, yeah, I know this, and you just forget something. So you've got everything written down, you already know them, and you're just checking them off to make sure you don't accidentally forget a step. The other ones are more for, well, the help desk example, for example, the people there maybe don't do the same thing every time, but when it does come up, they need to follow these steps. But then the checklist is there to tell them what to do. They don't necessarily know it before they've looked at the checklist. Either type, really useful. I recommend using them. Pomodoro Technique. Anyone come across this? Quite a few people. It's a personal technique, so to try and get you to concentrate. You set a timer for 25 minutes, and you work on one task for 25 minutes. It's really hard. Any interruptions, note them down. So if the phone rings, either ignore it and it'll go to voicemail, or tell them that you'll call them back at your end of your 25 minutes. But also the interruptions you make yourself, when you just open another web browser and start looking at stuff that you really shouldn't be. You end up to start with so many of these interruptions that you didn't even know you had. So you set 25 minutes, concentrate completely, and then you have a 5-minute break and start again. It's worth trying it if you need to really focus and get things done. It's a lot more difficult than you think to stay focused on a single task for 25 minutes. Now, this is a personal technique, so my takeout is basically multitasking is bad. Let people concentrate. Stop interrupting them constantly. You don't need to use the Pomodoro technique to do that, but those times when you send somebody an email and then go over to their desk and say, I've just sent you an email. Just let them read the email in their own time. Stop interrupting them. What am I doing? Right, speed up a bit. Monte Carlo estimation. So, the idea here is estimates are not facts. We all know this. We all know this in theory. In practice, we say it's going to take us about this long, and we're expecting it's going to take us this long, even before anybody's trying to hold you to it. So with Monte Carlo estimation, you come up with 3 estimates for each story that you're working on. You'll give a best case, a most likely, and a worst case. And effectively, you give some sort of probability spread across those numbers. And you do that for all your different stories. And then rather than just saying, I'm going to add them up and that's how long everything takes, you run it through a simulation. And it says, well, there's probabilities here. So let's say the first time I run this first story, somewhere between these numbers, it took that one. The next one, and you actually sort of have a run saying this is how long we pretend it took. And then you do 10,000 runs. And you take the average. When you're estimating things, some of them will go over and some will go under. And this is a way of getting a better idea of the probability that it's going to go over to under. It's a useful thing to look into. I don't necessarily recommend using the Monte Carlo technique every time you estimate anything. However, what I will say is there is other kinds of estimation than just planning poker. Now, I love planning poker, it's great, but you can use it in different ways, and you can use it in relation with things like the Monte Carlo estimation method. So consider other kinds of estimation in there as well. My last one is all about psychology. People are just so awkward, aren't they? Nobody wants to change. Well, everyone wants change. Everything must change. Everything is wrong, except what I'm doing. My stuff's great. There are a lot of various psychological techniques available. There's the individual and the team things, so things like the DISC model or Myers-Briggs or any of the 50 others that are behavioral styles or personality tests or these sorts of things that help you know how to interact with people. There are the team things like Tuckman, I think, the forming, storming, norming, performing, that you can look at team level, how teams are working and how they interact with each other. The thing I would say about people being the root of all of our problems is people are also the cure for all of our problems. We're getting nothing done without people. So really my takeout here is you need to talk to people. I know it's awkward, it's difficult. You need to get to know people. You need to understand how they work, how they best interact with each other. You need to understand your teams and any team that you interact with. What kind of work do they do? And how do they do that work? And the last thing I'd say is I've gone through all of these various techniques and I've picked out one thing from each of them that I quite like as a concept. But the only size that one size works for everyone is if you're a cat and there's a cardboard box. There's lots of pictures. Cardboard boxes and cats was going to come up at some point. You try Googling and not coming up with that picture. So I've gone through a lot of techniques, and that's my short list. So when I was trying to come up with what I was going to talk about, here are all the things that I considered putting in there. Some of them came in. Yeah. There's quite a lot of them. That's the last one. And that's just a brain dump. If I sit down and think about more, there'll be a whole load more things I can think about. And all of these are concepts and ideas hiding in there that we can consider. And even if they come from techniques that have got nothing to do with software development, so what? It doesn't mean that we can't use it. Checklist Manifesto has got nothing to do with software development. Neither does Pomodoro. Monte Carlo estimation is generally not used with software development at all. No reason it shouldn't be. And all of these things have got great ideas that we can use and we can take away. So is there anything there anyone particularly uses or is interested in? Okay, so that is my last slide. I will come back to the promise. So I promise not to exclude from consideration any idea based on its source, but to consider ideas across schools and heritages in order to find the ones that best suit the current situation. Anybody here willing to take that oath? Oh, one person, come on. Oh, excellent.